In today's video, I'm going to discuss Thanos' motives in Avengers Infinity War, and more specifically, will his actions actually save the universe or merely delay the inevitable decline of the civilizations he is trying to save? So without further ado, Thanos' plan is to wipe out 50% of all life in the universe to prevent planets suffering the fate of Gamora's homeworld and his own planet, Titan, which is one of population, starvation, I imagine climate change, overutilization of natural resources, and ultimately the extinction of all life on the planet. Now there is one thing I want to stress here. Thanos never explicitly states he is trying to save the beings of these planets in the film, merely the universe itself. It is heavily implied he wants to save sentient beings from extinction, but Thanos merely says the universe. Considering how he comes across as a being of omnipotence in the film, particularly when he gathers more of the stones, I am basing this discussion on Thanos wanting to save the universe and all it encompasses as a whole, not only sentient life. This is where scientific theory comes into the equation, and the core arguments of intelligent intervention versus evolution, natural selection, and the inevitability that, at some point in the universe, everything must eventually end. From stars to planetary conditions conducive to life, and indeed, mortal life forms. And this is true even in the realm of fantasy, comic books, and indeed the Marvel Universe.
It's not all that surprising, because after all, when a baby turns into an adult, you don't suddenly say, aha, it ceased to be a baby, it's now turned into a child. And then, aha, it ceased to be a child, it's now become an adult. It happens so gradually you don't notice the change. We've moved now from artificial selection to natural selection, which only Darwin and Wallace really grasped. Nature just means that some animals survive and some animals don't survive, for whatever reason.
So to kick things off, what is evolution and what is natural selection? Evolution, in a nutshell, is the process by which a life form continually develops and improves itself from its beginning as a very basic life form right up to the creatures we see around us today. It's a constant cycle of improvement which would typically only cease if the creature is perfectly adapted to its habitat or if for whatever reason it goes extinct. Now this goes hand in hand with natural selection. And as you just heard Richard Dawkins explain, natural selection is the process by which a species either survives or dies out. There may be thousands or even millions of reasons why a species may end, but at its very core, that is all natural selection means. So what does evolution and natural selection tell us about which species die out? For this summary, I will exclude the influence of modern human beings, so the time frame I'm referring to works backwards, starting from the mammoth extinction, right the way back to the beginning of life on planet Earth. The most basic and simple summary I can make is that typically of the species which have gone extinct, it has been due to an imbalance in the food chain, extreme, rapid or drastic climate change, natural disasters, tectonic activity and extinction level events. The common denominator in the species which survived versus those which went extinct is adaptability, with just a little bit of luck thrown in for good measure. For example, during the dinosaur extinction, large animals nearly universally died out, and the highest survival rates were in omnivores, insectivores and carrion eaters. Why? Because each group has a much more varied source of food to rely upon for survival, with carrion eaters feasting on the dead flesh of animals, insectivores feeding on insects which in turn feed on both dead plant and animal matter, and omnivores feeding on virtually anything available. I mean, if you've ever seen a fat guy at McDonald's, you'll know that's true. Pure carnivores and herbivores, on the other hand, being single food source creatures, had a much lower survival rate, and in some cases a 0% survival rate. This was because a reduction in sunlight reaching the planet resulted in a total collapse of global food chains, for pure carnivores and herbivores, as plant life exponentially decreased. So that gives you just a tiny bit of insight into how luck plays a part in survival, and also just how different species fare in different scenarios. So from past experiences and examples, what both evolution and natural selection tell us is that no matter the cause, creatures which are ill-suited to their environment or unable to adapt in the face of change are effectively guaranteed to go extinct at one point or another. We can also deduce that the main natural causes of extinction are extinction level events such as volcanic activity, changes in ecology and the food chain, and environmental change. So with all that being said, why on earth is Thanos trying to save a species from going extinct, which have by their own design misaligned themselves with their own natural habitats to the point of starvation and death? Think about it. He's supposed to be this near omnipotent being on a divine mission to save the universe, right? Intelligent life forms and sentient beings may have technology and society, but we're still a part of nature. The technology we have is part of evolution, derived from our needs to make basic tools to aid our survival, an evolutionary trait which was improved upon and perfected over millions of years. Advanced beings are still part of natural selection, in just the same way that through the forces of the universe and nature, only some planets are able to cultivate life, whereas others are not. Thanos is a guy that has been shown to have compassion on some levels, but be completely dispassionate at the same time, and have absolutely no hesitation in wiping out half of entire civilizations full of innocent people. In some cases, with the Asgardian refugees and the Xandarians, he killed half the population just because he could. He was on a quest for the Infinity Stones and had just claimed one from each civilization, so he didn't kill half of the population just because they were on the brink of collapse to save them. Thanos clearly did not care about the lives of these people, and nothing suggested they were living unsustainably. The remaining Asgardians could probably have done with their population being doubled rather than having half of it killed off. So Thanos clearly has no desire to save these people, yet he claims to be on a divine purpose to save the universe. And this brings me back to the point of why try and prevent a species which has driven itself to extinction, recognizes the fact and is still unwilling to adapt to survive via some emergency legislation or something to stop themselves from dying out? Why does it actually mean so much to him, and how is that saving the universe? What are the consequences of doing so, and does it really do any good to save a species which has driven itself to extinction through a blatant lack of understanding of its own needs, planetary management, and ultimately stupidity as a species? Would it really do any good to save a species in this scenario? Because surely the same thing is just going to happen again, so why delay the inevitable? And what I mean by all these questions is, surely if a race or species of beings has reached a point that they have advanced technology and have flourished for thousands of years, and they still manage to drive themselves to the brink of collapse, nature has selected them for extinction, right? I mean, surely there has got to be some sort of evolutionary fault for a species of intelligent beings which are capable of growing crops, maybe even engineering a planet to a degree, to do that to themselves. It's something I've said about Homo sapiens since about the age 12. We're stupid, we're flawed, and we will ultimately lead to our own demise. We are terraforming our planet right now to the point where it will be uninhabitable at some point, and one of the most powerful countries in the world goes and elects a man who denies the existence of climate change. The same concept exists here, and by Thanos saving these races, he not only disrupts the natural law of evolution and natural selection, in that only the strongest gene pool is supposed to survive, he could even be damaging the framework of the universe. And what I mean by this is that, as we know, energy is always retained and then emitted into another form. And in the case of a planet, surely by one dominant species dying out, it leads to other species being able to flourish and the opportunity for fitter gene pools to develop. Let's say human beings were to go extinct today, or next week, or whatever. Think of all of the other animals and mammals and creatures that we've damaged that could be allowed to flourish, and maybe, I don't know, maybe some other advanced being could evolve from another life form. If Thanos really wanted to save the universe and took a long-term view of things, which his planning around the Infinity Gauntlet from the beginning of the MCU up to now proves he does, he should know this and just let nature take its course. By Thanos interfering, he is effectively literally playing God with the entire cosmos in regards to which race of advanced civilization survive or which die out. And furthermore, he is negating a chance for potentially intuitive and intelligent individuals from these species to perhaps create innovative solutions or even splinter off and create a colony somewhere, which could lead to the advancement of the race via the majority of citizens with maybe average traits for their race remaining on a desolated planet, whilst those with common sense and intelligence, or maybe a little bit of genius or particular bravery or something, escape elsewhere, and thus a fitter gene pool is created in the long term, because only these intelligent and innovative beings are the ones to continue on the species. And as I said before, if this is not possible, then that's fine. They die out, they cease to exist, that's it. That's nature, that's the way life is, that's the way science is, and you just leave it at that. Why do you have to interfere for? And leading on to this, when you think about this in the real greater context, what if, let's say, species, because they've got space travel, etc, etc, so let's say maybe we're talking about humans in 2,000-3,000 years, for example. Let's just roughly chuck that out there. So that's the level of civilizations we're dealing with, sort of between humans now to humans 3,000 years in advance. What if species of that level of development and intelligence are only an intermediary? What if it's only one of the first forms of advanced life form? So we and species like us all die out, and then give it another couple 100 million years, or whatever you want to call the time frame, there's then another branch of advanced beings, but this time they're more advanced, so they grow to be more intelligent, they're more innovative, they understand the needs of the planet more, they're more ruthless as well, let's say, because ultimately Thanos is being ruthless in killing half the population, but you need to do that innately and have an innate desire to understand that for the species to continue. You can't just rely on somebody else just clicking their fingers and solving everything for you. And that's my issue with what Thanos is doing, because he's stopping evolution when he claims to want to save the universe, but the universe doesn't need saving. The universe knows what it's doing with itself. Life that is suitable for the universe will continue to flourish. Life that is not will just go extinct.
John, the kind of control you're attempting is, it's not possible. Listen, if there's one thing the history of evolution has taught us, it's that life will not be contained. Life breaks free, it expands to new territories, and it crashes through barriers painfully, maybe even dangerously, but I'm simply saying that life finds a way.
So I've rattled on about the scientific theory and other theoretical elements of what he's doing and why it doesn't make sense. For the next part, I'm going to talk about Thanos' plan in detail. So if we break down the actualities of Thanos' plan for saving the population of the universe, the longer-term socio-economic and cultural consequences of a sudden drop in population could be disastrous. So what I mean by this is, in the movie we hear Thanos explaining his motives and telling the Avengers what his plan for Titan's overpopulation was. He mentions how he would randomly and dispassionately wipe out half of the planet's inhabitants, which I assume was a creative decision supposed to make Thanos appear as a being who is cold, calculating, and of extreme rationality, in that he would treat and ultimately kill members of his own race indiscriminately. But this makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. It is true that no one being's life is more important or significant than another, but their worth, or at the very least contribution to society, can be much more significant depending on the role which they play within it. So the issue here is that in the scenario which Thanos presents, leading societal figures will almost definitely be required to keep shit from hitting the fan in a major way. But Thanos comes along and just randomly wipes out half of all people, so he's killing people that could be crucial to ensuring that the society doesn't just descend into absolute madness. Imagine this for a second. Some of the most important industries to a modern civilization are the food, energy, healthcare, pharmaceutical, mining and raw materials, technology, and pretty much every scientific industry you can think of. Everything is working fine and dandy, and then Thanos comes along and wipes out 50% of everybody working within them. Now it could be argued that as the entire population is decreased by 50%, there will still be enough people in those industries to hold society together, right? But I would argue the complete opposite. For starters, you just lost 50% of the only people who truly knew and understood how things worked or were done in those industries. What if he just happened to kill everyone who knew how to plant a field or mine for useful materials? Also, as the killing is random, it means that top minds from important fields will be wiped out completely disproportionately compared to other non-important industries, as well as to the overall output and contribution which they make to the survival of the species in question. It doesn't take a genius to work out that killing 50% of all dentists versus 50% of all medical research professionals will have a massive disparity in the overall well-being of society. What if, by the sheer randomness of Thanos' genocide, all leaders, lawkeepers, and military personnel were wiped out, but all criminals with a vengeful hatred of society were kept alive? You'd be left with a society in total anarchy, with no chance of returning to its former state. It would be something more akin to Mad Max or Grand Theft Auto than a grateful universe. I did have the original audio here, but you know, copyright bullshit. So get him, he's running away, we can't let him escape, we need him for a tribute, blood blank, whatever. I could list countless other scenarios where utter pandemonium would unfold, but in short, it's nowhere near as simple as just wiping out 50% of all life with no plans in regards to the validity of what the repercussions will be to the future infrastructure of the society moving forward. There is a chance, however, that the civilizations themselves could flourish in the long run, until of course they reach overpopulation once more, and Thanos has to whip out his glove again, as it's highly unlikely that thousands of years down the line, an event similar to that of Noah's Ark will even be considered as more than a myth or a story. The people killed literally just disappeared, for God's sake, so I don't imagine that the species culled will actually learn anything, nor have they been allowed to evolve as a species, meaning that the same shit will just happen again and again and again.
You should have gone for the head.
Anyhow, for this scenario, we'll assume they do learn their lesson for some reason. And so, for the individual species in question, We shall use the example of the major advantages and disadvantages of the mass death brought on by plagues which have threatened the existence of humanity in the past to see what could play out. Now, there have been numerous plagues and diseases spread throughout history which have genuinely contributed or even near outright caused the destruction of empires over the course of history. But the best example to use here is of course medieval Europe, where it is said that up to 50% of entire villages, towns, and even large cities were literally wiped out within a few weeks or even days of the first outbreaks occurring of the Black Death. Across the numerous outbreaks of the plague in the 14th century, historians estimate that between 30 and 60% of Europe's total populace was killed, with the entire global population dropping by around 15 to 18%. In the immediate aftermath of plague, social and economic impacts included religious purification and fanaticism, a societal feeling of suspicion and distrust, violence and in some cases the extermination of entire Jewish communities, reduction or complete cessation of food and other exports, severe reduction in labour supply, crop failures, extensive control being placed on the food industry, price fixing on essential foodstuffs such as grain, a spike in black market activity due to the short supply and subsequent bans on food exports, inflation, malnutrition, hunger, poverty, drained national treasuries coupled with the cost of ongoing war efforts, and a whole host of issues which are far too numerous to mention. Essentially, it saw the destruction of the very fabric of society to function even at a basic level effectively. And the people living through it at the time, with little to no understanding of the actual cause of the constant fatality around them, must have literally felt like they were witnessing the end of humanity as a species. But as we all know, humanity did endure, and so moving on from the immediate effects, the plague actually created an opportunity for those not born into nobility to improve their life conditions. So a major effect here was that social mobility dramatically increased, at least in some parts of Europe anyway, as Slavic European citizens actually became even more repressed and downtrodden, as their respective hierarchies of leadership attempted to control the aftermath of plague. So in some parts of Europe, serfdom became essentially obsolete, in the short term anyway, as society tried to rebuild itself, meaning that peasants were no longer tied to serve one lord their entire lives. They could instead go to where they would receive the highest pay. Equally, urban workers and those skilled in trade were able to do the same. Wages also shot up, and this coincided with cheaper land prices, as land was left vacant in the wake of so many of the former populations succumbing to plague. Women were also empowered to a degree from former social restrictions, and people were all of a sudden able to move up the ranks of society. However, the nobility and ruling classes did not like the newfound societal freedom, which threatened not only their control on wealth, but also the need for a nobility or ruling class altogether. So the birth of opportunity came hand in hand with restrictive and questionable laws being passed, which clearly protected the stance of the rich and oppressed the poor. further attempts at regulation were made wherever possible, and violence, revolts, and persecution against outlying social groups were carried out across the entirety of Europe. So the new European landscape was essentially a free-for-all, capitalized upon by brigands, criminals, and even the nobility, whom historians have evidence to suggest deliberately ordered raids on their own lands in a bid to intimidate the newly empowered and enriched peasants from believing that they could escape serfdom, to minimize their profits, and to cite the need for loyalty to their overlords due to the necessity of the protection they offered against the raids which they themselves were carrying out. And yes, that is correct. Essentially, medieval lords and nobility at the time were performing probably some of the earliest recorded cases of protection racketeering. So you could say that they were a lot more decisive, if anything, than politicians nowadays, I suppose. So following years of death and struggle and a post-apocalyptic society where people just apparently seemed to run amok and do whatever the hell they fancied, pessimism and morbidity swept across societal culture as a whole and was represented in literature, artwork, and architecture. And the continued oppression of the peasantry through the political system, combined with widespread chaos and violence following the Black Death, also contributed to two of the most crucial events of the age, which have helped shape the modern world. The first was the Peasants' Revolt of 1381, which arguably could be considered the beginning of the path towards modern human rights. And the second was the First Holy Crusade to reclaim Jerusalem from 1095 to 1099, commanded by Pope Urban II in an effort to unify all of Christendom, which had erupted into utter mayhem and infighting, with widespread skirmishes, war, and violence breaking out across the entirety of Europe in the wake of the first outbreak of plague 50 years earlier. It is an event which still molds modern geopolitical sentiment and tension to this day. There are a ton of other consequences of the plague which I could discuss on medieval Europe, which ultimately influenced the entire global geopolitical framework over the next few hundred years. But I think that snapshot shows just how devastating a dramatic reduction in population size can be in the short to medium term, as well as an example of some of the longer term ramifications. So in a modern setting, where citizens have access to weapons en masse, and where there exists huge international organised crime syndicates dedicated to furthering their own agenda at any cost, this has the potential to be even worse, as a society with a crippled government and inadequate martial capabilities is completely incapable of retaining control of society in this scenario. To give what I said even more credence, look a bit further back through time and you'll even find evidence supporting the fact that the infamous Justinian plague, caused by the same bacteria, Yersinia pestis, which killed so many people during the Black Plague, was a major factor in the destruction of the Roman Empire, or at the very least, the destruction of the Western division of it. So once again, excluding mass mortality rates, in the case of Justinian plague, some of the notable impacts on society are believed to have included severe disruption of agriculture and trade once more, steep inflation in the price of grain, famine, starvation, a steep decline in taxation revenue, cessation of the reunification of Rome's Eastern and Western empires, influenced the timing of numerous barbarian invasions, and the loss of many territories. 40% of Constantinople's population was lost. The near collapse of the entire economic and administrative system of the empire, decimation of the ability of the entire European continent to defend itself from foreign invaders, and over 2 centuries of the plague reoccurring across the Roman Empire and beyond. And furthermore, Justinian plague, over centuries of reoccurring, is said to have wiped out an estimated 13 to 26% of the world's population at the time. 13 to 26%. And Thanos wants to wipe out 50% of an entire species, and things will just be home and dry after that. No, Thanos, they won't. Your plan is stupid, it doesn't make sense, your motivations are weak at best, and are way better in the comics. Having said that, I still love this movie, but I just think that, like all Marvel villains, Thanos is just big, bad and ugly for the average non-comic book reading MCU fan. So his plan and motivations for doing them just doesn't cut it for me in the movie. I'm sorry, it just doesn't work at all if you know the actual Infinity War storyline and what Thanos is all about, because his whole thing is that he's obsessed with death, he's a genius, he's extremely powerful, etc, etc. But he's basically just a mad psychopathic sadist guy who's in love with the female personification of death. There's no more deeper meaning, saving the universe, doesn't make sense, mumbly jumbly bullshit. That's it. Now, I had a really well thought out and put together conclusion here, which I was gonna run with, but just as I was about to record it, something a bit left field came into my head, so I'm just gonna run with the freestyled, non-scripted conclusion. Really, it's a lot more blunt, and yeah, fuck it, man, let's do it. So we've looked at what Thanos' plan is, we've looked at the scientific theory behind it, and we've looked at the practicalities of it, the actualities of it. We've looked at some historical examples just to get some context, see what might happen, and we've then looked at the impact this will have on society. So now it's time to ask the question once and for all, does this plan actually work? Well, I'm pretty sure you can tell by now, my opinion on the matter is absolutely no fucking way does it work in any fucking sense of reality on this planet. No, it doesn't work. It's just stupidity. And again, he does say that he's looking to save the beings in the universe, but to be completely honest, I mean, this is sort of left field thinking here, but for everybody that's ever read that Star Wars series, I think it's Yusan Bong or something like that. Like, I've not personally read it, but I just know what happens in it from like YouTube videos and stuff. So basically these sort of super advanced race of aliens come in from another like dimension, and the whole reason why the Empire was created and put in existence is because Emperor Palpatine knew that it could face a threat from another dimension. So his way of defending the planet and everyone in it was the Empire, because the Empire couldn't be very easily put aside. It's just everyone is in one united organization and they can go for it. So this is not my main point, I'm not hinging my argument on that, but let's say, for example, just as a left field idea here, and also bearing in mind that this is comics, so it's fantasy, any bloody thing can happen at any time, and they've also introduced alternate realities in different universes and multiverses and the quantum realm and all that stuff with Ant-Man and Doctor Strange and whoever the other one was, and Adam Warlock coming into it as well and all that stuff. So Thanos has now killed half the universe and bang, some random ass creatures come out from, I don't know, some distant ass crack of space, who cares? and now you've just got a completely desolated populace of the universe. Does that make sense, Thanos? No. And then looking at it beyond the beings itself, as I was saying before with the whole evolution and natural selection thing, it doesn't make sense. You're not saving the universe, you're just keeping lesser races alive, if you will. And then on top of that, maybe you'd see other future civilizations maybe could have learned from the extinctions of other ones, you never know. So I mean, really, what Thanos should have done is just been an interstellar educator. He may as well have just flown around from universe to universe saying, hey guys, look what happened to Titan, man. But you know how you can stop it? What you gotta do is you gotta plan things out a bit more, you know. You gotta respect the resources, you know. You gotta control your population. And what I am trying to say to you is that Thanos could even go full preacher on their ass. He could go in like a savior, like a lord, like a man of the Lord. He could go in and teach these people the wrongness of their ways.
You can't train him to understand the world. They don't know how, and we need to admit it. I know you don't like it, but you need to stop shucking and jiving. We got a problem. Yet the children over there are hungry and pot-bellied and walking barefoot. We got a problem. They're crying out of despair. They're crying out of pain. They're crying out of lack. They're crying out of disappointments. It's not time for me to begin to feel sorry for myself. The word encourage means to inspire, means to give hope. Somebody lift your hands and say,
So fellas, what I'm saying to you here is use a condom and be frugal. That's a secret. And he might have had a bit more help that way. And if they didn't want to oblige, well, you got fucking infinity guff, so just blast them with something and I'm sure they'll do it. So you've saved them, well done, you ain't had to kill everybody for it. So as a final note, and this is the very final note of the video, thank you for watching, everybody who actually could be bothered to sit here and listen to what by now must be close to 40 minutes of me rambling on about bloody Thanos. But what does his plan actually show about Thanos? Because he is either an egomaniac driven by a vengeance to impose his will onto others because he was right about the loss of his planet, or he's just completely incapable of dealing with loss and driven ultimately by the grief of witnessing his planet dying out, that he will literally stop at nothing to prevent the loss of unique life species happening again because he just can't bear to see it. And he'll do this no matter the cost. But yeah, in terms of his whole plan and stuff, like, I'm not saying that it's an impossible or non-fathomable plan. It's sort of feasible on some levels, but it's just more a question of why? Why are you saving stupid people? Just let them kill themselves doing their foolishness if they want to, man. I mean, it's the same as humans. When some idiot burgles a house and drops through the ceiling and lands on someone's kitchen knife which was on their kitchen table, and the person whose house it was who got burgled into goes to jail for leaving a kitchen knife out on their own fucking table. Like, it just doesn't make sense. So for that reason, and I'm taking one for the team here, man, I'm on the side of nature here. So his plan is, yeah, it's just stupid, man. It don't make sense. It doesn't work. You're not helping nature. You ain't helping nothing, man. Considering that he has the time stone, it just makes even less sense. He could just go back in time and save Planet Titan. Or he could just change reality so that Titan exists and there's never overpopulation and there's always enough resources to go around. people will never go extinct, and then he doesn't have to bother doing all of this shit. And he can just sit on that little farm and just be happy and actually watch over a universe that is actually grateful that he didn't just kill half of every single person they've ever known. See, there's always too many plot holes in these films, man. There's just always something foolish. But anyway, that's me done. Peace out.